Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin on the election campaign trail with a riding that covers roughly 3/4 of Manitoba. Churchill Kiiwetinoong Aski is one of 36 the Assembly of First Nations says is a swing riding. The candidates debate was held in the northern Manitoba city of Thompson on Tuesday night, hosted by 3 First Nation political organizations. T.R. Wheatley has this profile of Churchill Kiiwetinoong Aski.
Starting in prayer by Marie Ballantyne, this candidates debate in Thompson, Manitoba was live-streamed in hopes of drawing more voters to the polls. The Churchill Kiiwetinoong Aski riding spans 42,000 kilometers and 60% of its residents are First Nations people.
Kiiwetinoong Aski, northern land, that's what that means. Our people, we have a spiritual connection to the land.
That's Walter Wastesikut sharing a traditional teaching. He's the Grand Chief of the Kiiwetinoong Tribal Council.
In March of 2023, our 11 nations declared a regional state of emergency.
Of the 11 reserves in KTC, 7 are fly-in only. Wastesikut says they are in dire need of basic living needs, more housing, clean water, and affordable food, and that all are affected by an alcohol and drug abuse crisis. His counterpart, Grand Chief Garrison Settee of Manitoba Kiiwetinoong Ugamaginak, adding this is a critical time for northern Manitoba.
Words. We need more than just rhetoric. We want to see action. We want to see transformation in our north, in the areas of health, child welfare, public safety, policing, and education. Those are very critical, and we need to see investments in the north.
The riding's been held by NDP Nikki Ashton since 2008. Amongst her victories, Ashton has helped in getting a health centre in Cross Lake, a hospital in Norway House, and has always backed the family of Jordan River Anderson, first to get Jordan's Principle started, and then just last year she helped draw attention to the backlog and the cutbacks to the program. An issue that was front and center where both the NDP and Liberal candidates came to the table towing their party lines.
But I think we also need to be clear that it's the Liberals that have cut Jordan's Principle, right? So in the last budget, the Liberals tried cutting $7.6 billion from Indigenous services, and the biggest chunk was to Jordan's Principle.
Since 2016, over $8.1 billion has been invested through Jordan's Principle. So this has resulted in approvals of more than $7.8 million of products, services, and supports for First Nations.
The 2-hour debate was a back and forth between the two, with moderators and chiefs in attendance asking questions. The other 2 candidates in the riding, Lachlan Dinardi with the Conservatives and Dylan Young with the People's Party of Canada, sent their regrets. There were comments made during the forum from candidates, chiefs, and even on the live chat regarding the no-show, many saying they weren't surprised or even bothered that the 2 didn't attend, as the riding is generally a two-way race between the NDP and the Liberals. Another big issue that came up multiple times, getting an all-weather year-round road up the east side of Lake Winnipeg. Right now, the only road access for the 10,000 people in the area happens in the winter for 6 weeks of the year. Ashton said this jeopardizes lives during emergencies, using the example of having to rely on the armed forces to evacuate and fly out over 3,000 members from Bonabonabee Cree Nation in one day last summer because a wildfire got too close.
Things could have been much different if people had the opportunity to evacuate on their own, and we know that things can and should be much different for people living on the east side and in remote communities, including in the far north, Brochet, Lac Brochet to Dooley Lake.
Chartrand says the Liberals remain committed to infrastructure such as the all-weather road and putting more money into the Port of Churchill and the rail line that leads to it.
So we need to make sure we move forward, and you have to make sure you do that with a party that's actually going to be in government. The NDP will never be in government federally.
So the last election in 2021, Chartrand did not run. However, she ran in 2015 and came within 900 votes of beating Ashton. This time around, expert polls have this race pretty much tied, which has the candidates traveling all over the riding, hoping to draw in as many First Nations voters as they can. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, TR. As the Elver fishing season continues in the Atlantic region, a Mi'kmaq harvester is now prohibited from being within 200 meters of any river in Nova Scotia. Comes after he was arrested for obstruction and assaulting fisheries officers. But as Angel Moore reports, he claims that is a violation of his inherent right to harvest.
That is Daniel Francis on the ground, surrounded by Department of Fisheries officers and RCMP during an arrest that happened last week on a road by the Tangier River, 90 kilometers east of Halifax. Francis is a member of the Pictou Landing First Nation, but lives in the Millbrook First Nation. He was harvesting Alvars baby eels with community members when the officers showed up.
And they were yelling at me. By the time I noticed, two of them grabbed my arms, one on each arm, and the other one grabbed my head right straight to the pavement.
The Nova Scotia RCMP say Francis resisted arrest and a struggle ensued after Daniels allegedly tried to retrieve Alvar fishing nets from fishery officers when they were attempting to conduct an inspection.
So it seems like they were doing the obstruction. They were obstructing me with exercising my rights.
The Mi'kmaq are harvesting Alvars to earn a moderate livelihood. Alvars can be worth up to $5,000 per kilogram, but Francis says he cannot exercise his treaty right because of a condition of his arrest. He is ordered to stay at least 200 meters from the shoreline of all rivers in Nova Scotia, except crossing a river on a bridge. Francis says that is a violation of his rights, and he will continue to fish.
And being First Nation and trying to make a livelihood, that stops everything about being First Nation. I can't do a livelihood. I can't do anything right now. So I can't even go fish for my dinner if I wanted to.
RCMP said in an email the conditions are being imposed to prevent the continuation of offences or commission of another offence. Francis is set to appear in court on May 21st. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Japutuk, also known as Halifax.
Time for a quick break, but first, our Yellowknife video journalist Bruce De La Cruz is giving us a sneak peek of the federal election environment in the Northwest Territories.
Hi there. This is Bruce De La Cruz coming to you from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. With the federal election just around the corner, stay tuned as I sit down with the candidates of the Northwest Territories federal riding, acting as your voice and asking the questions that you want answered. And that's all for now. Back to you in the studio.
Welcome back. Despite Sharon Boccini now being deceased, her family is continuing the fight for her Indian status at Ontario's Court of Appeal. The story to regain status began over 100 years ago in the Sandy Bay First Nation in Manitoba. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
Members of the Boccini family gathered outside Osgoode Hall following an appeal hearing for their mother's case. Steve Boccini says it's been an ongoing legal battle to regain his mother's status.
Well, 27 years, and I'm nervous, and I hope justice prevails here.
Boccini first applied for status for his mother in 1998. She was awarded status in 2007, but 2 years later, she was deregistered by the registrar at Indigenous Affairs because her grandfather accepted Métis script. Sharon Boccini died waiting to be reinstated. Steve says his mum would be proud they've continued her fight.
My mom would be proud, yeah. So she would be proud, and she'd be excited, nervous, and happy that, you know, her story's getting out. Look, you know, this is what happened.
The cause for Sharon's loss of status began over 100 years ago when her grandfather, St. Pierre Cook, accepted Métis script. That invalidated any treaty rights he may have had. The family's lawyer is Lucas Lung. He told the court on Tuesday that there is evidence Cook was underage at the time, and he could not legally accept script. Lung also pointed out the script was signed in 1888 by a known fraudster at the time, an individual named William Sifton. Last July, the family won their case at the Ontario Court of Appeal, but it was short-lived as the Attorney General of Canada appealed that judge's decision. Lung is feeling positive about the appeal hearing.
I mean, I feel good. We had a good hearing today. We had a very, very active panel. All three justices had a lot of questions for both sides. And this is a case that raises a lot of issues, and it raises a lot of important issues.
Steve Boccini is also hopeful of a positive outcome.
They're fighting us so because this is going to involve a lot of families. A lot of families, this will involve probably thousands of people. And I think that's why they're fighting us, tooth and nail. I mean, this is our third time. We won once, then a second time, and now here we are back in court again for the third time in 27 years.
According to Lung, a decision could take months. Indigenous Services Canada declined to comment. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Toronto.
The Grand Chief of the Southern Chiefs Organization says he has renewed his oath of office and provided chiefs and proxies with an update on his health and wellness during a two-day summit. Jerry Daniels took a short leave of absence following a fight last December outside a bar in Ottawa. SCO held a two-day summit this week on Long Plain First Nation territory. According to a press release, 4 resolutions were passed, including one on reporting on SCO economic development financial statements and to ensure the transparency of economic development and financial activities undertaken by SCO and related entities. Delegates also received information about why various companies have been created to undertake various economic reconciliation initiatives, including the redevelopment of the former Hudson's Bay building in downtown Winnipeg, a project that has now seen its budget double. Daniels is quoted in the release as saying, "It is clear there are many whose aim is to create obstacles on the path forward." It's Thursday, and that means our Truth and Politics panel is here. We'll speak with Jennifer Lewitz and Egon Sinclair after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And about 10 days ago in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Shania Murdoch was able to get up and close to some newly arrived geese as she fed them some cracked corn. You can send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be featured as our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, sunny and 10 in Fredericton, 11 for Halifax. +1 in Kuujjuaq, snow, and 2 in Nain. 13 in Montreal, 6 in Val-d'Or. 12 in Sault Ste. Marie, 14 in Ottawa. 7 in Thunder Bay, flurries, and 2 in Sioux Lookout. -1 in God's Lake, 0 for Norway House and the Paw. 0 in Winnipeg, +1 and cloud in Dauphin. 5 in Regina, sunny, and 9 in North Battleford. 3 in La Ronge, Stony Rapids, and Uranium City. In northern Alberta, 18 in High Level, 13 for Fort McMurray. 17 in Edmonton and Red Deer, 13 in Lethbridge. 15 in Vancouver, sunny, and 23 in Kamloops. 13 in Prince George, 11 in Smithers. -2 in Old Crow, 6 above in Whitehorse. 6 in Yellowknife, 4 in Norman Wells. -15 in Sax Harbor, +2 with snow for Paulatuck. -13 in Chesterfield and Whale Cove, 11 below in Arviette. -11 in Resolute and Arctic Bay. We are now more than 2 weeks into this federal election campaign, and the second and final leaders debate is less than an hour away. Efforts are underway to get out the Indigenous vote, and the Assembly of First Nations says First Nations could tip the scales in 36 federal ridings. But Indigenous issues have been absent from the political discourse. We're wondering if that will keep people away from the polls. For more, our Truth in Politics panel is here. Jennifer Lewitz is the CEO of Pasqua Harbor Strategies, and Niigaan Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Niigaan, we'll start with you. There are voting drives underway to get Indigenous peoples to the polls to vote. There were huge turnouts, especially on reserve in 2015 and 2019, but that dipped in 2021. What do you think we'll see this time around?
Yeah, it dipped in 2021, I think because of what I'll call a wide-scale disappointment with the movement on reconciliation with the federal Liberals. And then if people were disappointed last time, they're definitely going to be disappointed this time because there is almost no talk about Indigenous issues. What happened is from about a 67% turnout back in 2015, 61% in 2015, and then 67% in 2019. Now it's dropped to about 6 or 3 in 5 people come out and vote. You probably will see that less this time around. However, I think when you have Donald Trump influencing an election, all hands are on deck. And it may just be that the fact that Indigenous issues are absent in this election may get swept aside for people who are generally invested in the idea of the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. I think Indigenous peoples are far more interested in engaging, continuing to talk to and be a part of Canada than rather be a part of the United States. And so I think there'll be a decent turnout, but there may be a continued drop this time around.
Jennifer, as Niigaan said there, in the absence of any real discussion on Indigenous issues so far, are you feeling like Indigenous peoples are going to be rushing to the polls in this election?
It's hard to say. I feel like there's definitely been a lack of conversation around Indigenous issues in this election, especially when it's in comparison to the 2015 election when Trudeau made some pretty big promises towards First Nations in this country. The water crisis is a big one. But it has been a little bit concerning just because of the fact that there's some big issues on the table right now. You know, child welfare, we're still having that conversation about that funding, First Nations policing funding, you know, not consultation and consent, especially when you're hearing about resource projects. So there hasn't been a lot of talk, but the sovereignty of Canada is still an Indigenous issue, and Nigon was absolutely correct. When you have those threats or conversations from down south about annexing Canada and making us the 51st state, that is an Indigenous issue, especially when we are, the original occupiers of this land and we're in a relationship with Canada and the Crown. So it will be interesting to see how many Indigenous people show up to vote, especially when we do have that sway in 36 ridings.
Nigon, we've talked about the 36 federal ridings where First Nations voters could decide the outcome of the election, but a riding like Kenora Kuwaitanung, where there are 3 First Nations candidates, currently showing as a 99% lock for the Conservatives, or Thunder Bay Superior North Indigenous Services Canada Minister Patty Haidu's riding, currently a 99% lock of her winning re-election. Are some of these really swing ridings?
I think when the AFN put out their report, maybe the comms, the communications wasn't always so clear. What that report said is that in 36 ridings, the number of First Nations voters in that riding was larger than the previous spread of vote between the first and second candidate. And so in some ridings, you see very large Indigenous proportions, but for instance, in Winnipeg West, you see actually First Nations voters only make up 3%, but the difference between the first and second place back in 2021 was 1%. So it's a little deceiving to say 36 ridings. I was speaking with Eric Grenier from the RIT, who is widely known as the leading pollster across the country to sort of looks at all the different polls and the ways in which they trend. He has several ridings in Manitoba, Northwestern Ontario, and Saskatchewan, who he calls swing ridings. But for those of us who are in those ridings, we know that those are not really swing ridings. And so there's sort of a bird's eye view of the country as looking at certain ridings. And then there's the actual on the ground kind of ways that happens. So that goes to strength of candidate, that goes to the kind of issues that are being impacted, like for instance, the tariffs in particular communities, which impact more communities based in industry than others, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole bunch of factors that go into that. What I would say is that it's better to know the locality than it is to be the bird's eye view of what the country's looking like. But the country is absolutely looking towards a Liberal majority, and it's not in any way going to be shaped on any individual riding, but I think certainly there will be a lot of ridings that will be closer than expected.
Right. Jennifer, we've talked about how the NDP could lose party status at one point here. Given this really seems like a two-party race this time around between the Conservatives and the Liberals, do you think that will impact where Indigenous voters cast their ballot this time around?
I definitely think so. I think if some people think that, vote splitting could potentially cost the party that they want to get in their votes, then they're going to do what they can to vote strategically. This does very much feel like a two-party race, especially when the NDP are unfortunately performing terribly. And they're almost the balance in the House that sometimes you need to see, especially when you have a center and then a center-right party that are taking up a majority of the seats. But I think this just highlights why it is so incredibly important for our leaders to be meeting with the two parties that are at the forefront and what their priorities are with Indigenous people across this country. And that would be Prime Minister Mark Carney and Leader of the Opposition, Pierre Poilievre. I don't think that we can ignore those two people right now. I think we need to be at the front and center and having those conversations about where these two leaders fall on various different issues, especially when there's no platforms and we don't know where they fall on all of these different issues. So yeah, I definitely think it'll be important to hear more from them.
Not costed either. I mean, that's like, when have you seen an election campaign where none of their promises have been costed? That's a real concern.
It's supposed to be coming soon, we're told. Jennifer, Nigon, we'll leave it there for this week. Nigon, we know you got a busy night tonight. We'll be thinking of you as well. Thanks to you both.
Yeah, me glad. Thanks.
And Jennifer will be back here with us in just a few minutes from now for our Decision 2025 pre-debate show. Also joining myself and Creason will be Pam Palmater and Cam Holstrom. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. We'll see you back here in about 90 seconds from now.